Hi all, thank you for joining us in our 2024 complimentary webinar series covering the FAR, or Federal Acquisition Regulations. We're coming to you live today from Washington, D.C. We're so glad you're here. Okay, so a little bit about the series. As usual, all of our webinars are complimentary and recorded. The FAR has 52 total parts and we'll run through them sequentially each week on Wednesdays and Fridays at noon Eastern Time. The recordings and PowerPoints will be posted within 24 hours of the webinar ending. You can find the recordings on our YouTube channel simply by subscribing to it using the link you see on the screen. There is no cost. You can find the PowerPoint on the SlideShare site using your LinkedIn credentials to log in. Again, there is no cost. We also offer sponsorship opportunities. If you're interested, please send us an email to hello@jenniferschaus.com. And now, how to sign up for the series. Unfortunately, there is no bulk registration. You must register individually for each webinar. If you go to the Jennifer Schaus website, navigate to the section called the FAR, you'll find the individual registration links. Also, the recording links will be posted here upon completion of each webinar. Please note, we covered the FAR in 2020, so if you're eager to get a jump start, please find these historical recordings on our site. Navigate to the Webinars tab and scroll down to section the FAR 2020. Because it has been 4 years, many of the regulations have changed and been updated. Please use this as a reference tool only. And now, a little bit about us. We work with established federal contractors worldwide, helping them to navigate the market. Our services range from market analysis reports to contract vehicles and compliance. Some of the contract vehicles we support are listed here on your screen. For more information, please visit our website. Okay, and those were our services for federal contractors. We also provide marketing and advertising services for organizations who are selling to federal contractors. We can add extra muscle to your marketing efforts via our newsletter ads and webinar sponsorship to in-person events. Please email us and ask for our media kit. Speaking of events, we hope you'll join us at the John F. Kennedy Center on Monday, February 12th for an evening of networking. Our winter soiree will bring in about 300 federal contractors as well as confirmed attendance from DoD and the VA, including NAVAIR, NAVC, and NSWC. Please register in advance on our website under events as tickets generally sell out. We hope to see you there. Our webinars are complimentary thanks to our longtime and generous corporate sponsors. Please allow me to introduce them. We would like to thank our friends at GovEvents, the premier platform for posting events related to government and government contracting. You can find all of our webinars and our events on govevents.com, as well as recordings from our past 600 plus webinars. We also want to thank Tom Johnson and his team at Set Aside Alert, the go-to publication for contracting opportunities for small, women-owned, veteran-owned, HubZone, and 8A firms. Visit setasidealert.com for more information. The Fairfax Economic Development Authority has an online calendar of events and webinars. We want to thank them for posting our events and webinars on their calendar. The Virginia Apex Accelerator at George Mason University offers free one-on-one counseling to established government contracting firms in Virginia on federal, state, and local procurement topics. If you're interested in learning more, please use the link provided to explore their services, review homework recommendations, register for live training, and find useful links to agencies and other self-directed learning. One-on-one counseling is limited to eligible client companies. Appointment requests are handled in the order they were received and based on counselor availability due to high demand. Online resources and group trainings are free with no restriction on business location. Join the Greater Reston Chamber of Commerce's monthly GovCon Council meeting to network with contracting peers, learn about upcoming events, opportunities, and also contribute to future programming. The meetings take place the fourth Tuesday of each month at 8:30 a.m. at the Greater Reston Chamber of Commerce. The next meeting will be on Tuesday, February 27th. Do you want to help winning government contracts? BidSpeed can help. Users can find bidding opportunities from federal, state, and local government. Additionally, you can search for teaming partners, including incumbent point of contact, expiring contracts, compliance matrices, and proposal templates. Create your login today at www.bidspeed.com. BidSpeed is an official partner of the U.S. Small Business Administration 7J Management and Technical Assistance Program. Events are the ultimate engagement channel to bring government and industry together. 68% of government personnel report that they attend more than one event each year. FBC has worked with government and industry for 45 plus years to create gatherings where ideas are shared and to help government achieve its goals. This includes agency industry days, cybersecurity symposiums, technology expos, and off-site meetings. FBC provides full lifecycle meeting planning and event management. With over 5,000 meetings under their belt, FBC has the experience, systems, and personnel to make your next event exceptional. Learn more at www.fbcinc.com. Please check out our friends over at GovBrew. GovBrew is the most read GovCon newsletter, keeping thousands of GovCon professionals in the loop with the news, updates, and opportunities in the federal contracting market, all in a fun and accessible email that only takes 5 minutes to read. It's 100% free to join. It goes out every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 a.m. It's filled with great content, event postings, webinars, and more. We encourage you to sign up at govbrew.co, or you can use the QR code you see on the screen. Okay, now let's meet today's speaker. Please welcome Jody Reed to the webinar. We're honored to have you with us today and are excited to hear a presentation on the FAR. We appreciate the time you took to put together the content. Jody Reed, I'll put myself on mute and turn the floor over to you. Please let me know when you're ready for your next slide and we'll advance them as discussed.
Thank you. As you see here, I kind of seem to have two jobs. I'm a partner at the Reston Law Group here in Reston, Virginia, and I advise clients on a broad range of things. Mostly the things I relate to are the government contracting arena, obviously, but my specialization is protecting intellectual property for government contractors, and also I've been involved quite a bit with the cybersecurity initiatives that have been going on. And I'm also the Vice President of Contracts and General Counsel at OWL Cyber Defense Solutions. They are a cyber defense company that basically provides hardware-enforced cybersecurity devices to the Department of Defense and commercial and other organizations. Next slide. Next slide. So once you understand how the FAR is set up, it actually is pretty easy to find things. It is in Title 48 of the Code of Federal Regulations. There is actually 57 chapters, and I must correct one thing. There's actually 53 parts to the FAR. It's just that most people don't use the 53rd one, but there is actually 53. The first chapter, the one we're going to talk about today, is Chapter 1, and I'm going to talk about a few other things that are in the Chapter 1 that really aren't as, from a practical perspective, from a company perspective, doesn't really do a lot for you. But most of the federal acquisition regulations, the FAR, are directions to the government on how to contract and how to deal with certain situations. It's an interesting, it's a really somewhat clever way they've set this up. Your first thing you have is the numbering system, which is the part, which is Part 16. In this case, we were talking about Part 1, so it'd be Part 1. The subpart is 3 digits, and then the dash is the lower levels. Some other, next slide, sorry. The other really nice thing about the FAR is once you know how the FAR is set up, you can find the exact same thing in the agency supplements. And all of this is described in FAR Part 1. For example, 16402-2, if there's any changes that the Department of Defense would want to put in there, those changes would be in 216.402-2. So these are called agency supplements. And the S there is not a plural for regulations. It actually means the word supplement. And these are some other ones that you have. Again, you'll see 216, 5316. If you go to acquisition.gov, that website, if you're in the government contracting arena and you do government contracts in any way, shape, form, or fashion, where you're the contracts kind of person, the finance person, or anything like that, that should be in your browser as a direct link, because you can get from there to all of the agency supplements as well as the FAR. Next slide. So the general structure of the FAR is And this is the one thing I do think that's kind of a little bit of a sad thing is we've lost this with this all being electronic. But if you go to any kind of a book, you'll still see it this way. So the general structures, you'll have subchapter A, which covers the general stuff. We're talking about part 1 today, which is the federal acquisition system. I've got some more, I'll talk a little bit about some other clauses in there, but this is probably one of the least, shall we say, impactful sections for the average contractor, right? Because most of it is just setting up how the FAR is set up. What I've done is I've highlighted in bold several of the parts that I really strongly recommend that you attend the sessions for those, because those are the ones that really and truly have a lot of impact on various contractors. Part 2. Part 2 of the FAR is supposed to contain all the definitions of words and terms. However, be careful, because when you go to the clauses, which you'll see in a few minutes, frequently what happens is there may be a differing definition. I was just answering a question today. What's a large business? And I had to explain that depending upon where you're looking at a regulation, the definition of a large business changes. And I know we're talking to a lot of small businesses here, but it's very possible that you can be a large business in one category of work and a small business in a different one. So you have to really look at that. So I want to just go to the next slide. And I know that they'll be talking about all these other sections in more detail over the coming year. Next slide. Contractor qualifications. Again, this is guidance that is provided to contracting officers on what they must look at as a contractor qualification. Does that mean that the contractors can ignore this stuff? No. And the reason why you can't is because if you don't meet the qualifications that the government has to look at in order to do it, you can't be awarded a contract. Some other key clauses, key parts. Part 12, acquisition of commercial items. And I'm really kind of surprised frequently why that one is included in subchapter B, when to me it probably should be in subchapter C, because it is a way of contracting these days. Some other ones, the simplified acquisition procedures, sealed bidding. Next slide, sorry. Contracting by negotiation and types of contracts. There are multiple types of contracts, and your risk levels that you have for those is going to be going to vary by the type of contract. Small business programs. I'm sure there's many of you on here are very interested in that, so I really strongly suggest that you join that one. I recently had a conversation. You'll also notice there's a few parts that are actually reserved. I just recently had a conversation with another attorney at a large defense contractor, and their particular contract they were dealing with was another transaction agreement, which the FAR does not apply. And I had to explain, much to the dead silence I got on the end of the call, which regardless of whether you have the law from the federal acquisition regulation apply to you or not, the labor laws, they're conveniently provided here, but the underlying law is what's actually going to be applicable to you. Next slide. Foreign acquisition, it's only important if you're buying stuff and selling to the U.S. government, other places. Patents, data, and copyrights, that is somewhat critical when you think about protecting your intellectual property. And obviously, I spend a lot of time talking to people about things in Part 27. Cost Accounting Standards Administration, that applies to larger businesses, but it can apply to a small business if you get a very large contract. But Part 31 is definitely one area that you're going to want to pay attention to, because that one does apply to pretty much anything you have. And even if you have a firm fixed price contract, unless it's a commercial contract, the government can come in and take a look at your books and and if you're not compliant with the cost principles, they can make you pay money back. So it's something that's very important. You watch that one. Contract financing, another one. Small businesses rely on contract financing in order to finance their work. So it's also a critical one that I strongly recommend people listen to. Next slide. Protests, disputes, and appeals. It's kind of an interesting thing. When I look at statistics or I look at decisions on protests, it's interesting. There are more protests by smaller businesses than there are by large businesses. And I think it's because the large businesses, I could speculate, but I think a lot of it's because most small businesses are in a lot more competitive areas where the margins are maybe a little bit tighter, so you're more willing to fight to keep your rights. Federal supply schedule contracting, think GSA, think of the things that Jennifer Schaus does that can help you with that. And so I strongly recommend if you're trying to get into a GSA schedule. I read an article, gosh, and it really stuck with me. It was back, I'm going to show how old I am now. It was back in the late 70s or early 80s, probably early 80s. And it was in like the Washington Post magazine or something like that. It was a weekend article. And this guy had a really awesome idea, had a very successful business, and then it went bankrupt. And when it went bankrupt, he got interviewed what happened. And what he said has always stuck with me. He said, I had a great idea. I had great expertise in getting the stuff to that idea. My problem was I wasn't a business person. I wasn't a cost person. I wasn't a person who was an expertise in the things of being able to run the business. So I stopped doing what I was good at. It started doing all the stuff I was bad at it. And when I finally stuck my head up out of the sand, I realized that I had lost my business. So I can't say enough. If you're thinking about getting an 8A schedule, not 8A schedule, but trying to get on the GSA schedule or the VA schedule or any other federal supply schedule, hire an expert to help you. And I've known Jennifer for a number of years, and I can tell you that Jennifer definitely has the expertise there. Acquisition of information technology. That's going to become more and more critical. If you were to look at the DFARS under Part 39, there are a lot more things that are going to be applicable to that. But again, it's going to fall under the area of the acquisition of information technology. Next slide. Contract management. So you will not generally see a clause, a 52 clause that applies, that has Part 42 apply to your contract, or if it does, it's fairly generic. But all the things that are in Part 42 are going to apply to how the government manages your contract. So it behooves you to read that section, understand it. And also the audit clauses, contract modifications. There's the saying, what the king says is always right. There's things, it's good to be the king. Well, contract modifications, it's good to be the king. But contractors need to be very careful under that, because if they don't do it correctly, they can end up paying for a lot more of it than they should have. And you do see a lot of cases. It's interesting when you see the cases that actually do make it into the published decisions and stuff like that. There's an amazing amount of them in which the contractor actually wins the case. So it's something, and they'll win the case, but because the contractor did not do a good enough job of keeping their costs separated and things like that, it's one of those, they call it Pyrrhic victories. They win the case against the government, but they still don't get any money because they can't show it. So it's something that you need to be familiar with. Subcontracting policies. Most people think of that as looking at it from the top looking down. But I use a lot of times when I'm talking as a subcontractor, I'll use what's in there to protect the subcontractor in looking at going up. If you get government property, Part 45 will apply to you. Quality assurance. We hear a lot about ISO standards and things like that, but you need to read your contracts to see what levels of quality assurance they're going to require. Part 49, termination of contracts. It's probably the area here that I have the least expertise in. It's a lot of paperwork, but it's something that does actually happen. And I have a kind of a funny story about that too. I used to be in-house counsel at BAE Systems, and they'd had a subsidiary that they had bought, and it, quite frankly, it wasn't performing. The work had gone away, so they were absorbing the entire subsidiary work into the parent company. And but we needed to go and close stuff out. So we had a meeting with the government, a bunch of different contract specialists and contracting officers, and because we were trying to close out a bunch of contracts. This was in the 2000s, maybe about 2005, 2006. So that's an important point. There was a contract that from a term perspective had expired in 1978. And I don't remember why I remember that date, but 1978. And we wanted to close it out. And there was something called special test equipment. And you don't see that as much now, but there was something called special test equipment. And this particular piece of test equipment was an odometer, which is something that measures electricity coming out of a wall. It is about the size of a large cell phone. Did I mention this contract closed in 1978 and we're now in about 2005, 2006? Yeah, I had a contracting specialist that said I had to give that particular odometer, that serial number, back to the government because it should have been protected as government property under Part 45. And as part of termination, you have to turn in all your special test equipment. The other contracts people there rolled their eyes, which was kind of amusing. And I finally just looked at the guy and I said, we've offered to give you the money back. We've offered to give you a brand new one, which why you would want an old and you could get a new. And he said no. And it was like, okay, fine, then we're never closing the contract. Good luck with that. But Part 49, termination of contracts, is a lot of administrative type work. Next slide. Part 51 is use of government sources by contractors. Most people don't use this. Part 52 is where all that stuff that I talked about before gets implemented in contracts for contractors. And then Part 53 is forms. Now, I will tell you right now, the government is woefully lacking in forms. Many of them say explicitly that they've expired. They don't tell you that you can go online and get them. So if you look at the online version, you can usually get an online version, but they're not keeping them up to date. But I will also tell you that in many cases, even if the forms has expired, for example, like reporting intellectual property that has been created pursuant to your contract, if you don't use the form that they've provided, even though it says that it expired by a certain date, you risk protecting your intellectual property. Next slide. So looking at, we talked about the clauses, right? So we want to look at how using the FAR. So you want to know if a clause, provision, or form should be included in the contract. The 52.301 is the FAR matrix. And it says, and by the way, it is a complete eye chart. It says what should be included, what contract clauses. The prescription of clauses, such as like 15.209, again, the 15 is the FAR clause that is not the FAR clause. It's the section of the FAR where they're describing what clauses must be put into a contract. And then your forms again are at 15, or the prescription. So what you'd look at is what they do is they take the subpart 52, add that in front. For the FAR, they add the number 2, and then you have 15 and -1. So you can go and find where that clause, where the prescription language is. And it's interesting, I just recently had a client where the prescription, they're providing a specific service on a cloud, and yet the prime contractor keeps wanting to have them sign up to actually the clauses that say very specifically they're for providing telephone services. And we've gone around a couple times on that. Next slide. Up. So while that's up there, I'd just like to point out a couple of other things that should think about with FAR Part 1. And I'll tell you, quite honestly, the average person never ever looks at FAR Part 1. It does, FAR Part 1.2 describes the maintenance of the FAR. And by maintenance, we're talking about where the clauses get changed. There's actually two councils that do that. One is the Defense Acquisition Council, which is called the DAR Council. And the reason why that's actually listed first is because the FAR became an outgrowth of a regulation called the ASPR, which was the Armed Services something regulation. It's always called ASPR, so I didn't bother paying attention. And the FAR is actually relatively new comparatively. The ASPR was started back in, I believe, in World War II. Just starting some of the things that they started implementing, some of the statutes that Congress had instituted and put now into the regulations. The FAR itself didn't come into being until 1984. When I got to my first FAR, it was a big notebook that was truly, it was about two of those 3-inch binders, and the DFARS was maybe a 1-inch binder. I will tell you now, if you see a printed version of the FAR and the DFARS is as big, if not bigger, than the FAR. The second council is the Civilian Agency Acquisition Council. It's called the CAA Council. If there's a new regulation, they're always published in the Federal Register. And when you see you go to different places and they'll say there's a proposed rule, it's open for comment. All of that's published in the Federal Register. The way things can become law, by law I mean actually the regulation, you can have a proposed regulation, goes through a cycle, and then eventually becomes an applicable regulation, or you can have a regulation that becomes the law by virtue of it being out there, and they'll still go through the comment period, but the regulation in that area I'm thinking about is cybersecurity and the CMMC stuff. 1.4 of the FAR is the deviations. You can have an individual deviation which affects only one contract, or you can have a class deviation that affects a class of contracts. DoD uses a lot of class deviations, and what they're doing is they'll use a class deviation pending getting a change to the FAR, or pending getting a change to the DFARS a lot of times. 1.6 totally applies to government workers. It's the career development, contract authorization responsibilities. And that's also the section that describes the authority of a contracting officer. By the way, contracting officers have the authority to make changes to contracts. Contract specialists do not. Technical people do not. Program offices do not. Only a contracting officer. And contracting officers are given it's called a warrant. They're given their warrants, and their warrant may be an unlimited warrant, or it may be a very limited warrant. And it behooves you sometimes, if things seem like maybe something is bigger than what it should have been, or something like that, you can actually request to see a copy of the contracting officer warrant. And finally, 1.7 is for determinations and findings. And basically that's required for certain contract options. Think about, say, for example, a sole source justification. What they have to do with that is they have to do a determination and finding before they can issue a sole source award, and then they also have to do a justification. As I mentioned earlier, I am now also with Alice Cyber Defense Solutions, LLC. I'm going to do a plug for the fact that we're trying to hire software engineers. I was just at a conference this past week, and we're looking to try and hire 40 software engineers primarily. Prefer to have some expertise in cyber, but not 100 necessary. But if you're interested, please go to Alice Cyber Defense web page and check out if you know of anyone. And feel free to use my name as well. And on that note, I am done with the presentation.
Thank you, Jody, for a very informative presentation, and thanks to everyone who joined us also today. As mentioned, you can always catch the recording on our YouTube channel within 24 hours and find over 600 webinars on government contracting there. And also, just a friendly reminder that tickets are going fast for our winter soiree. Please join us and many federal agencies and departments on Monday, February 12th. Sign up by going to our website and selecting the Events tab. Scroll down to the event, and we hope to see you there. And that's it for today's webinar. Thank you again to Jody and everybody who joined us. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.